Hello, everyone. Welcome to our pre-concert discussion for Transatlantic Musical Heritage from Sancho to Johnson. My name is Phillis Wheatley. I'm a PhD candidate at Indiana University in musicology. I'm here with Rebecca Cypess and Sonya Headlam, who are going to share a little bit about their concert.
Thank you, Travis. Yes, we're really excited to be here and to be able to share this program with a wider audience. We're going to be exploring the works of several extraordinary 18th century writers and composers, all of African descent. And the journey transcends continents and cultures from both sides of the Atlantic, highlighting the music of African European composers Ignatius Sancho and Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, alongside the early 19th century African American composer Francis Johnson. We're also going to highlight the poems of two authors of the time period, also of African descent, and from opposite sides of the Atlantic, Phillis Wheatley in America and Olaudah Equiano from London. If you have not yet had time to do so, hopefully you'll have a chance to read the program notes for the recital that Rebecca wrote and are provided in the program, and give a lot more detail than we'll be able to go into right now about the lives of all of these remarkable artists. But before we go into more detail, I just want to point out something that's probably obvious to each of you, which is how each of these figures bore the profound impact of the transatlantic slave trade. Each of their lives were both directly and indirectly shaped by the harrowing experiences of enslavement, displacement, and separation from family. And they all had directly or within at least a generation their language, culture, religion, and more ripped away from them. And according to the biographies, both Sancho and Equiano were born in West Africa and made the forced voyage across the Atlantic, also known as the Middle Passage, as young children. The same is true of Phillis Wheatley. Bologna was born to a mother that was enslaved at a plantation in Guadeloupe, and as a young child, he was sent to live in France. Most scholars agree that Johnson was born a free man in the US, and he lived in Philadelphia, which at the time had a large population of freed Blacks and was a hub of the Underground Railroad and the abolition movement. Despite these adversities, and in an era marked by societal challenges and limited opportunities, these individuals showcased not only their incredible talent, but also the courage to share their intellect and creativity with a broader audience. It's remarkable and worth taking note that each of them had works of theirs published during their lifetime. As figures of African descent, their published works stand as powerful statements of resilience, a commitment to breaking barriers, and a commitment to equity. Each piece performed is a window into their lives and experiences, and a reminder that even in the face of adversity, these artists of African descent made a deliberate choice to make their voices heard. And despite the diversity of their experiences in lands across the Atlantic, what we hope to illuminate is the common threads between them, and how against all odds, each of these artists contributed significantly to the cultural tapestry of their time. So this is not just a celebration of their individual accomplishments, but also a recognition of the interconnectedness that bound them together despite the vast expanse of the Atlantic. And these threads of connection are not abstract. Ignatius Sancho, for instance, left us with evidence of his awareness of Phillis Wheatley's poetry. Equiano settled in England in 1767 and very well could have crossed paths with Sancho in London. And Johnson was the first African American to tour a band in Europe in the 1830s, and his band played for Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace. In 1773, Wheatley made a trip across the Atlantic to London with the hopes the trip might bring about a chance of her having her work published, and she was successful. A volume of her poems appeared in London in the summer of 1773. Crossing the Atlantic was no small feat in the 18th century, and for Wheatley, it was a courageous step toward achieving recognition. I think it's important to also point out the profound dichotomy embedded in the act of crossing the Atlantic. For all of these artists, crossing the Atlantic at times in their lives was not done by choice and a harrowing experience. The beginning of life marred by enslavement, displacement, and the brutal realities of slavery. Yet at the same time, for each of these artists, crossing the Atlantic also represented a journey toward a different kind of freedom, and the Atlantic became a bridge to opportunities and a path toward a more liberated life. So in acknowledging both the forced and liberating aspects of crossing the Atlantic, we confront the complex tapestry of their experiences. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now. Rebecca, I'll pass over to you.
Sure. So thank you, Sonya, for that beautiful exposition. And I have to say that it's been such a joy and an honor for me to be able to work through some of this repertoire with you. Sonya and I first dipped our toes into performing Sancho's music, the songs of Ignatius Sancho during the pandemic. It was in the summer of 2020, and we brought the square piano, this beautiful 18th century instrument that I have the pleasure to have in my home on loan right now. We brought that instrument to my backyard, to the deck behind my house, and we recorded some of Sancho's songs for the Gotham early music scene. And I think for me anyway, it was a real revelation. I think that I was kind of shocked myself at having been a musicologist and interested in 18th century music for as long as I was and have been, and never encountered Sancho before. And that surely says something about, you know, the priorities of our educational system up until now. But it was a real kind of illuminating moment for me, and a very humbling moment for me. And so on and off for the past 5 years, Sonya and I have had the opportunity, I've been really blessed with the opportunity to explore this repertoire with her and think a lot about Sancho's place and the place of these other African heritage artists, whether in England or in France or in the Americas, and kind of what traces of their artistry remain, and how much of their artistry, because it was never notated or never preserved in notation, is now lost to us. But sort of using these really interesting and amazing case studies as a window onto that broader culture, again, has been a very illuminating and humbling experience for me. So I've been very honored to participate in that. I thought that maybe I could just say a few words about those broader issues that really they've left like little hints and traces in the written archive, but how incomplete that written archive is. And so when we think about Black musicianship in the Atlantic world in the 18th and early 19th centuries, how much we don't know. So just as an example, I think the case of Equiano, this writer, Olaudah Equiano, is really interesting. It's clear from his published autobiography, which was published in 1789, it's clear that he loved music and had a really profound musical sensibility. So we know, just for example, that when he was on a ship and working on a ship after he had self-emancipated, right? He purchased his own freedom. He learned to play the French horn. And he describes being really good at the French horn and learning to play the low range and the middle range and the upper range. And, you know, that actually opens this window onto the fact that there was a widespread tradition or custom of Black musicians, some enslaved and some free, learning to play the French horn and using it as part of their professional lives, their expressive lives. So So he describes that we don't have any French horn music that was ever notated by him, and he never says specifically what he was playing, but we can piece together different bits of evidence to understand the role that the French horn played in the lives, especially of Black men at this time. So we know in London and in America that enslaved Blacks were made to learn to play the French horn so that they could participate in ceremonial occasions or call signals for the hunt, right, on those horns, but that they also use them to accompany dance music. And we have evidence, again, on both sides of the Atlantic that that dance music often included horns, sometimes, very rarely, notated, right? There were notated horn parts, but very often unnotated, and it was just a matter of oral tradition. We also know that there were that those Black musicians would have played the French horn in sort of balls or dances held by white people. Again, sometimes coerced into doing so, and sometimes perhaps as a paid professional. But that there were also all Black dances at which the African community in London, for example, would gather and mark special occasions, or just gather because they gathered, right? And there was a sense of community, and music was part of creating and articulating that sense of community. So that's why we're not going to hear any French horns on tonight's program, on this program, but it's really interesting that Ignatius Sancho published among his instrumental pieces 5 minuets that contained notated parts for the French horn, which was extraordinarily rare. Again, playing French horn was a matter of oral tradition, like a lot of brass instruments. It was just something that people learned to do by ear, and that's how Equiano learned to play the French horn. So he mentions it in passing, but actually it's this kind of little hint toward this very broad world and very broad culture of instrumental musicianship. Equiano also describes when he's traveling on board his ship, he docks in different ports in the south of the United States and in the Caribbean, and he describes hearing music, traditional music of African communities, these displaced communities and communities that had been forced into slavery and forcibly removed from their homes. There's a whole musical world there that he describes hearing, and he describes in very, very vague terms, unfortunately. So we really don't know a whole lot about what was going on there, but there are certain, kind of glimpses from the written archive that scholars have begun to kind of elucidate and put some more detail, flesh out a little bit further what that story was like and what the musical world might have been like, and how that musical world was then mediated through the Western European tradition of notation. So I think what's wonderful to see here is that that kind of joining of worlds where Black musicians enter and assert their voices within the world of notation, of notated music, of art music, whether it's songs or instrumental pieces. And so the notated music becomes a space of convergence, of dialogue, and in some cases of resistance. And so there's a kind of subtle irony in a lot of the poetry that Sancho, for example, takes and sets to music. There's a critique going on. He doesn't come out openly and criticize the people around him who are participating in the slave trade, but his critique is subtle yet unmistakable. There's an irony, there's a wit, there's a kind of biting. There are a couple of letters in his published volume of letters where he's very, very open about criticizing soundly the African slave trade. But in his musical world, there's an anti-racism and a critique of the slave trade that is subtle, but it's unmistakable nevertheless.
Thank you both for that fantastic introduction into what we're about to hear. I have a lot of questions that have come from hearing what both of you have just said, but something that you've both pointed out is, as scholars and performers, both of you, the not necessarily the different angle, but sort of the more digging you have to do. Because Rebecca, like you mentioned, there's not much information on some of these figures. And so not necessarily the extra work, but sort of the extra step that you have to take to learn more about these figures. And I want to just focus on a few of the pieces that we're going to hear from you. Um, I'm really curious about the Equiano poem. So I know that y'all have chosen to set it to a tune by John Travers. Could you speak a little bit about that process of, what is the poem like? What led you to Travers, and possibly what led you to that specific tune, or what was the process of setting that poetry to music for the two of you to perform?
Sure. Sonya, do you want to take this one?
Well, maybe I'll start, and and just kind of talk a little bit about what the process of putting this program together is like, because part of what happens is you say, okay, I would like to do a program with Sancho's music, but you need to fill out this program with other other music. And at some point, Rebecca and I came up with the idea of maybe including poetry. And it was Rebecca who, I mean, she does such a brilliant job curating these programs and like the flow of everything moving together. But she's the one that, came up with a few possibilities, like take a look at this hymn setting and see if that would work. And so I just would sit at the piano and kind of play around with trying to sing. She was matching the stresses of the poem with the music itself, and what fit well and what didn't. And so that's kind of how, this came about. It literally was just like, we're just gonna dig in and try and see what works, but also that it comes from a place of trying to kind of broaden and share more of the art and music and words and lives of people of African descent from this time period. And so, yeah, I think that's a really cool part about it. It's that, yeah, it does take a little bit more digging and a little bit more investment and thinking creatively on how to do this, because not everything is, just wrapped up in a nice bound score that you can find at your little library. So yeah, Rebecca, maybe you have more to add to that.
Sure. Yeah. The Equiano poem, which is titled Miscellaneous Verses or Reflections on the State of My Mind During My First Convictions, that poem appears in Equiano's autobiography, and it's at a moment where he's had this religious epiphany. And he decides essentially to become Christian and join the Church of England. So the poem is set in, I think it's iambic tetrameter, right? Da 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 da, right? Those kind of four stressed syllables per line, with the emphasis on the second syllable. So da 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 da. There's always a pickup at the beginning of the line. I think that's correct. That was very common for 18th century English hymns and kind of psalm setting or psalm adaptations. So there are these volumes of musical settings of psalms, including this one by Travers, which really are, they are kind of musically formulaic. I think we picked one that has a little more interest to it because there are kind of different sections which do different things musically. Some of them are quite repetitive. This one's a little bit less so. But I think that's part of what I mean about the musical sensibility that's very clearly embedded in Equiano's autobiography, but it's just not notated in music. So I think what we were trying to do was imagine if he were to sing it, what might it have sounded like?
Great. Thank you so much. Now a question about the performance act itself. First, Rebecca, could you tell us a little bit more about the instrument that you're playing? So what is the square piano? We've heard of forte
Sure.
pianos, we know the clavichord, but what is this square piano that you're playing?
Absolutely. So first, my acknowledgments to the owner of this instrument, Leslie Martin, who has allowed me to have this instrument on loan since 2019. And I've been trying to do interesting things with it while I have it. It's a really beautiful instrument. It was built in London in 1780 by the inventor, essentially, of the square piano, he was a German immigrant to London named Johannes Zumpe, or Zumpi, as he was known in English. And in the 1760s, Zumpi developed a mechanism for a piano that would allow for very subtle kind of changes in dynamics and a very responsive touch, so that the changes in dynamics would occur with the very slightest changes in finger pressure. And it's a very compact instrument. You'll see in the video, it is a full 5-octave range in the keyboard, but the soundboard and the total size of the instrument is relatively small. So this was a domestic instrument, it was used occasionally in public concerts, but most often at home, in the salon, in the parlor, in kind of private or semi-private music making, which is exactly the setting for a lot of the pieces that we're playing here and singing here. And we know, for example, that the Montague family, which was associated with Sancho, the Elizabeth Montague owned a square piano almost exactly like this one. So it was very much kind of current during the time that we're talking about. It was about a third the cost of a harpsichord. So it was relatively inexpensive, and something that was used by a wide social range also. So Marie Antoinette and Queen Charlotte each owned instruments just like this. Members of the aristocracy and the nobility owned instruments like this, but so too did farmers' daughters, who were kind of aspiring to climb the social ranks. And there are some really kind of brutal caricatures of like the farmer's daughter who's very uncouth and doesn't know how to play music, but here she is banging away on a square piano. So what's really special about this instrument is, for me, its ties to precisely the world that we're talking about here. It was built in the year of Ignatius Sancho's death. And that when I think about that, I have a kind of visceral response. There's something very moving to me about having this material and sonic window into this world. And so it's been a real privilege and a treat for me. It has some really interesting features that you don't hear, for example, on the more commonly used Viennese fortepianos today. They were in use in the 18th century, but have been revived and are more widely used today. So the English square has perhaps because it has pedals that when you lift the dampers of the instrument, there's this incredible kind of wash of watercolor sound that emerges, and a real blurriness. Even when you put the dampers back on, there's still, and lower the pedals, or let the pedals return to their normal state, there's still a resonance. The Viennese instruments really stop the sound very quickly. That was one of the things that, for example, Mozart liked about the Viennese pianos, while the English squares still have some kind of messy resonance that continues after that. So
Thank you. And now, Sonya, for you, what is it like to sing with a square piano? So I'll confess, I've only heard a square piano one other time. So this was a really unique experience for me to listen to. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone sing with a square piano. Does it feel different than singing with the forte piano or harpsichord? What is it like being in the room with that instrument?
Yeah, it is. I mean, just like Rebecca said, that feeling that comes over you when you think about the fact that this historical instrument is in the room with us. And really, it feels like it is the star of these. It is. It is this object that comes to us from the time period that is sitting there with us and participating in music making in present day. I mean, it's truly remarkable and beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of the things that we learn when we start. Like, I remember my performance practice class with Rebecca Cypess at Rutgers University, and one of the things that we talk about is how what informs the music, the practice, is also your relationship with the instruments. You can't really gain an understanding of the performance practice if you're using modern instruments or using an instrument that is not from the time period. You learn so much just by having that interaction with an instrument that you know, that they were playing and at that time. And yes, the sound is just absolutely beautiful. It's almost like a harp. It has a lot of resonance, and it has both like the chiaroscuro, what we say in the singing. It has this a brightness, but also this warmth and kind of depth to it that's just really lovely, and that I try to find in my own singing voice. So it's just a pleasure to sing with it and to have the experiences like we've had of performing in very intimate spaces like we were able to do in the concert that is about to air, because we get a real sense of what it is like to make music with it. And it really is special. I think that for me, the feeling of just having an ability to just sing, because this, like as Rebecca said, this was a domestic instrument. This wasn't something that was in a concert hall. And you imagine that the singing that people were doing with this instrument, they were just, you know, maybe the kids in the family home were singing songs around the instrument, or a guest comes and decides, oh, I have a song to offer. So it just has this kind of feeling of just yeah, having an ability to just communicate the music in a very straightforward and yeah, a straightforward way that speaks to everyone that is there to hear it.
Great.
Maybe
And I mean,
if I could, maybe I'll also just mention, we've sort of been playing around, experimenting a little bit too with this instrument. Sonya and I commissioned a set of songs by the composer Trevor Weston, using texts that he selected from Sancho's letters. So these are new songs composed in a Westonian style, and they were written for this instrument, for the square piano, and for Sonya. So we've recorded those and hope to be releasing that recording soon, and hopefully doing a kind of celebratory premiere this coming fall. But so we've sort of tried to, you know, add additional voices and repertoire to that, but still kind of using this wonderful, almost living artifact of the time. So that's been another adventure, another chapter in this kind of exploration that we've been doing.
wow, that's fantastic. And I can't wait to listen to those. I'm sure that's going to be stunning. And I mean, you've just led perfectly into what my last question was going to be. You've already started to talk about it, but what do you see as the future for this project? So hearing y'all both talk about the process of selecting repertoire, what are the sources that exist? How do we find information on these figures? I mean, in many ways, this seems like a starting point for something much larger. So you just mentioned one extension, but what are ways that you both hope to see, maybe not specifically just this project, but these figures, these musicians? How do you hope to see this repertoire grow? What are some possible next steps for musicians who want to start performing this repertoire?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, that that's why it's so wonderful and important to have many people from all kinds of backgrounds thinking about creatively and using their imagination to think about what could be next. Because really, you know, it could be anything, and that's what's so exciting and amazing about it. We certainly have had a wonderful time thinking through some of these programs, and as Rebecca mentioned, the commission for Trevor Weston's piece is just one example of something that could continue in various other ways, to bring the voices of the past to the present, but also to continue thinking about ways to layer, making those two worlds meet. So like again, with the instrument that we're using, being played with a modern composition. I think that that's just also really exciting, and there's so many different places that something like that could go. So I think that the main thing is just for, you know, if there's students out there that are thinking about, you know, finding repertoire that they're interested in, maybe there's just a narrow something that they say, oh, I found this one thing, but it's not really enough. Well, you know, you can start thinking about other ways to broaden that. And when I say enough, I mean enough to fill a whole recital program. And yeah, and I think also one of the things that Rebecca and I have discovered in this is that from the second we sat down with Sancho's music, whose music was also totally unfamiliar to me until, you know, we started this, we knew there was so much there. There was so much more and so much there, that we had never heard about or had anyone, you know, read anything about. And so just this idea of taking the time to really look at material and think about it, and I think also including different perspectives, because I think that that also has impacted the work that Rebecca and I have done together, is the fact that we're able to look at it from a lens maybe different from what, you know, people in the past have, as all of us, right? I mean, every person brings a different perspective. And that's, I think, what is really exciting about this time and seeing programs like this come up. And we're just like excited to see where other people can go with it and continue our journey with it ourselves.
Yeah. I just want to amplify something that Sonya mentioned at the beginning of what she just said, which is that it takes teams of people working across disciplines really to think about these questions. So just to mention a couple of the, you know, literary historian Bricken Carey, among many others, really has done foundational work on the literature of Black Britons in the second half of the 18th century. And I know that that has really guided the field from the perspective of literary studies. Lots of people also, you know, kind of working on those issues. But I think the kind of creative reimagining that we're trying to do in this program, using Wheatley, using Equiano's poetry, in addition to kind of notated music. So Patterson Joseph is an actor who has done a kind of theatrical rendering of Sancho's story and has now published his debut novel a few years ago, The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho. So that kind of, again, like the artistic reimagining and the creativity that goes into kind of these sorts of recreations. There's also a team at Northeastern University, a team of historians and folks from other disciplines led by Oliver Ayers and Nicole Aljo, that has unearthed really, really fascinating new documentary evidence of Sancho's life and others. So if you Google Northeastern and Sancho, you will come up with they have an interactive map of Sancho's London, which also presents images from the documentary evidence that they found. So that's a really fun kind of publicly accessible way to get at some of this new research. And I'll also just mention a research group that Sonya and I participated in at Rutgers when I was on the faculty there. If you go to sancho.rutgers.edu, you'll find a kind of host of essays on the arts and in Sancho's world. not only around him, but using him sort of as a focal point and point to bring together these different conversations. One of the most exciting things that came out of that interdisciplinary project was a project by the historical dancer and scholar of dance history, Caroline Copeland, who put together a series of wonderful videos. Again, you can see them on sancho.rutgers.edu, where she and colleagues have imagined and sort of juxtaposed what we know about things like the 18th century minuet in kind of elite white social circles, primarily white social circles, with what we know about Caribbean dance and African heritage dance in the Atlantic world at the time. So some really, really interesting. They're also kind of juxtaposing those what we know of 18th century ballroom dance with contemporary West Indian dance and Caribbean dance. So really fantastic work that also uses that approach of creative reimagining. And if this sounds like, well, where's the historical authenticity? I think I would just point out that the whole historical performance movement is about creative reimagining. Like there's so much that we don't know about performance, even when it's notated, right? When the music is notated, that we always have to bring our imaginations to bear on music, on dance, on theater. If we want to experience these artworks for ourselves, it requires that we approach them with curiosity and with imagination and with respect, and try to submit ourselves in a way, or be humble in front of the worlds that we're trying to access and to see and hear. So
Absolutely. I mean, this so much, and for showing us and ending us with this area is rife for re-exploration, and there are so many places to look, and there's a lot more work, it seems, to be done. Thank you again both to Sonya Headlam and Rebecca Cypess, who are presenting their concert, Transatlantic Musical Heritage from Sancho to Johnson.
thank you, Travis.
Thank you, Travis.